On this edition of FedGov Today with Frances Rose, the roadmap that's coming for federal acquisition.
Hopefully the process will be quicker. Again, we still got to think through, wait, how does automation work? How does workforce capacity work and all that?
Former FAST Commissioner Julie Dunn on FedGov Today in just a moment. First, though, federal agencies are sitting on $100 billion in savings. The Government Accountability Office says the savings could come from cutting duplication, fragmentation, and overlap. You'll learn how on the next FedGov Today TV this Sunday morning at 10:30 on ABC7 in Washington and on the FedGov Today YouTube channel. If you miss the debut of the show Sunday morning, you can watch on demand anytime on YouTube and at fedgovtoday.com. The latest round of revisions to the federal acquisition regulation includes changes to FAR Part 10. Leaders at the General Services Administration say there are many more changes coming to the FAR to achieve the agency's goal of streamlining federal government acquisition. Julie Dunn is principal at Monument Advocacy. She's former commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service at GSA. Julie, thanks for joining me. This strikes me as a seismic change to the acquisition landscape, what GSA is proposing to do with all of these FAR changes that are coming along. Am I overstating that, or is maybe the government community as a whole not paying as much attention to this as they probably should? Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. I don't think you're overstating it at all. It's been 40 years, and the original intent of the FAR was to put it all in one place and kind of bring some order to the various federal agencies' own acquisition, supplements. And I think over time, we've had just sort of this buildup of requirements. And it's come from the executive branch, it's come from the legislative branch. And this effort really, really seems focused on kind of streamlining and really emphasizing the value of time, and also really emphasizing commercial. One thing that struck me, and I often thought about this when as you know, I was a staffer on the House Oversight Committee and I covered federal acquisition policy. And one of the things I often thought about is, well, why don't we just sunset some of these clauses? Why don't we put that in there? And the FAR rewrite executive order says, you know what, if you do keep, as you rewrite this stuff, if you do keep these non-statutory provisions, then you should put a 4-year sunset in there. I think that's kind of important. It's a 4-year sunset unless the FAR Council weighs in and says, no, we want to keep it. And that makes a lot of sense because a lot of these requirements, they get stale over time. A lot of requirements, maybe, they just don't fit anymore in the FAR. So I think you're exactly right. It's a huge change.
Those two observations about value, I think, are really insightful, Julie. The value of time and the value of commercial. What are the indicators that you're seeing in what we know about the revision so far, that, no pun intended, that cause you to say that is where the folks that are redoing this are placing their value?
Well, I think that we've also seen, some other executive orders. And I mean, there have been several executive orders that touch on federal acquisition, and one of them really emphasizes buy commercial. And I think that's something, the value of time in the commercial setting is something that's sort of out there. People understand that when you're trying to buy, and figure out what your supply chain looks like and get the product to market. The federal government is a little bit different, and it should be, but I think there should be an increased emphasis on time because the commercial sector can deliver that stuff. I mean, we're slow to adopt sometimes. There are obviously pockets around the federal government that, they innovate, they figure it out, they lean in kind of thing. And I think the way they're revising the FAR, there's also the signal to the workforce that we do want you to lean in. We do want you to kind of take risks. That is a good thing for the contracting workforce. We also need to make sure that the leadership is there to support them as they do take those risks and lean in and try and get the good or the service to their mission partner as quickly as possible.
How do you think that those items that you just described will manifest themselves in specific changes to the FAR whenever this becomes a mostly finished or a finished product?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. We've got 50 plus more to go. But I think the part 1, which is out there with the guiding principles, those signals are kind of coming out in the way they've talked about, buy commercial. It's not nearly as prescriptive from what I've seen so far. So that kind of gives a signal to the workforce, hey, we really want you to figure this out. And we're not asking you to check, 5 different checklists, right? Don't waste your time doing that. Go and talk to industry. Go and use all these different market research tools. So those are some of the things I'm seeing, just kind of big picture signals. There's still more to come. I mean, I think like FAR Part 12 is commercial. There, a couple parts on labor and environmental. We'll see where these things land. But those are the signals I'm seeing so far.
You mentioned the workforce, and I wonder what the cultural piece of this will be. And it's one thing for the FAR to change. It's another thing for the people who implement it to actually use those changes. And I'm not implying that anybody would do anything nefarious, but change is difficult in big organizations like government acquisition organizations. And I remember when Dan Gordon was the OFPP administrator, he had a Mythbusters campaign that basically revolved around the fact that the FAR doesn't really say these things that you think it says. And so if that's been the case for an extended period of time, and now they're going to change what the FAR says, I wonder what you see as being necessary to make sure that trickles down to the people that are actually going to implement it. Like you just referred to the people who are doing market research according to FAR Part 10 and the people who are doing all these other tasks.
Yeah, I remember the Mythbuster campaign, and I still look that memo up every once in a while about how industry should be talking to government and government should be talking to industry. Yeah, you've hit on the hard part, right, is culture and educating the workforce. But I think, it's flashing bright red that we want you to take these risks. We want you to buy commercial. We want you to negotiate with industry, negotiate hard. We want you to adopt technology to make your jobs easier. That's going to take some time to filter, but the leadership signals, at least so far, they're there. I think we're still going to see some things related to capacity. There are a lot of folks that are leaving the federal workforce for a number of different reasons, and that's going to impact implementation at some level. But we'll see. The team at GSA, the folks that are there, they're very talented and they've got a challenge, but I think they're up to the challenge.
Well, and the capacity issue, people are talking about that in another context, which is if the agencies are going to mostly get out of the acquisition business for common goods and services, and that's all going to go through GSA, automation's probably not going to solve all of that problem. It's probably not going to soak up all that capacity, is it, Julie?
That's true. Automation is not going to be able to solve it all. But it's a couple years since I was at GSA, but some of the simple tools that we were rolling out, some machine learning tools, they really were big time savers. So that kind of effort on steroids, I think that will help. But one of the big things as GSA has evolved over time is customer service. We really thought hard, like, what exactly do the agencies need? And I suspect that some of those acquisition vehicles merged over to different agencies because maybe at some point they weren't getting what they needed. So I think they're going to have to do their due diligence to make sure they're providing the right contract vehicles, the right goods and services, the right requirements and all that. So it's going to be a challenge. And it's kind of a wait and see. They've got a very aggressive timeline. I think for, the consolidation effort, agencies were supposed to provide their plans to GSA within 60 days. And I think we passed that. That was last week. So, we'll see what agencies have proposed. And then GSA is supposed to take that and then ultimately provide a plan to OMB. So we've still got a lot of unanswered questions about what exactly is going to move.
The anecdote that you told a couple of minutes ago, I thought was really interesting about when you were on staff on the oversight committee and you wondered why some of these things couldn't be sunsetted. When you went to GSA and became FAST commissioner, did you gain any insight as to why either logistically, tactically, culturally, whatever, that was difficult to do?
Well, I think just like stepping back on the legislative branch, sometimes we just didn't think about putting that language in there to sunset it, and maybe we should have. On the executive branch, we did try and there was an effort to look at the number of clauses that had built up over time for commercial goods and services. Like, wait a minute, which ones do we no longer need? And there was a rulemaking process that we were undertaking, but it was really hard to come to consensus. But there were simple things like, we no longer need to have a clause that says you need a wet signature on a contract, right? So there was the low-hanging fruit, but then sometimes it gets a little more complicated, and the FAR Council is a consensus-driven organization. So we thought about it, and we did our level best, but it's probably more work to do.
I know there is, as you said, still a lot of work to do on the FAR revision, and there are still a lot of details about the consolidation of acquisition at GSA that we don't know yet. Given all of that, though, understanding all of that, what's your sense of what the purchasing process might look like in 2 years or 5 years? More buying through the schedules, more buying through big vehicles, whatever. How do you think it looks different at some future point than it does today, if at all?
I think there will be fewer vehicles. But hopefully we will have adopted things like on-ramps and, technology refresh clauses, things that we started to think about with Oasis Plus. So I think that the schedule is going to stick around, probably new and improved. I think some of the GWACs, they'll build out. They were pretty good at delivering value, particularly things like Alliant 2. I remember our assisted acquisition service use that vehicle, quite well in terms of helping deliver for customers like DHS and DoD. So I think that, hopefully the process will be quicker. Again, we still got to think through, wait, how does automation work? How does workforce capacity work and all that? So still more to come.
It's great to talk to you again, Julie. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
You can read more about how the acquisition landscape's changing on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Open source intelligence is in more demand now than it's ever been. You'll learn how federal government organizations are using it and how industry's partnering with them on the new show, Innovation in Government OSINT. You can watch it on demand anytime at fedgovtoday.com and on the FedGov Today YouTube channel. The next FedGov Today podcast is coming next Tuesday. You can listen to every FedGov Today podcast anytime you want on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for listening.